put the gloves on, almighty sister-in-law, or should I snap your arm and send you to the hospital right in front of that little brat daughter of yours?" Marcus sneered those words and tossed a pair of MMA gloves directly at my boots. Behind him, his father let out a booming, guttural laugh that shook the humid air. "Teach this pathetic soldier a lesson, son. Show her that in this place my money is the law." I stood perfectly still on the grass, looking at the relatives who were eagerly trying to crush my daughter and me. Overseas strangers in uniform took bullets for me. Here, my own family drove the deepest knives into my back. They had no idea that cornering a special operations officer wasn't a flex of power. It was an absolute death sentence for their arrogant empire. Before I tell you what happened, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel, but only if this story resonates with you, and let me know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is where you are. I spent a decade in war zones, Fallujah, Kandahar, forward operating bases so deep in hostile territory that the supply helicopters would not land. They would just kick the pallets out the back and bank hard before the ground fire started. Places where the air tasted like burnt metal and diesel, and where the only promise anyone kept was the promise to bring you home breathing. I earned my rank one deployment at a time, one close call at a time, one scare at a time. Major United States Army, Special Operations Lead Security Assessor. My job was to see threats before they materialized, to read people the way a surgeon reads an X-ray, and to neutralize problems with the least amount of noise possible. I was good at it, the best, according to the men and women who had watched me work under fire and still asked to serve on my team for the next rotation. But when I came home to the Virginia suburbs, I locked all of it away. My medals went into a fireproof safe in the basement closet, stacked beneath a folded flag and a commendation letter signed by a 2-star general. My operational history got buried behind a classified wall so thick that even a federal judge would need 3 separate signatures to crack it open. I told everyone, including my own sister, that I was an administrative clerk at the Department of Defense, a desk job, a GS-7 payra, a nothing title for a nothing woman pushing paperwork in a basement office. That was the plan. I stripped away every trace of who I really was because I had one mission left that mattered more than any combat deployment: raising my daughter Lily in peace. Every morning followed the same pattern. I poured black coffee into a chipped ceramic mug with a faded Army logo on the side, leaned against the kitchen counter, and watched Lily through the window. She would be out in the yard by 700 a.m., chasing the neighbor's cat through the Elia bushes, or building something out of sticks and mud near the back fence. I scanned the tree line out of habit, cataloging the fence posts, the blind spots near the garage, the sight lines from the road, and I noted the distance from the front door to the sidewalk. I counted the seconds it took for a car to pass from one end of the street to the other. Old instincts, the kind you never switch off. Not even in a cul-de-sac, where the biggest threat on the block is supposed to be a stray raccoon getting into the trash cans. That peace lasted exactly 4 months. The first sign was a convoy of moving trucks rolling down our quiet street at 6 a.m., followed by a matte black Mercedes G-Wagon, with aftermarket chrome trim and tinted windows that caught the light like a warning flare. Richard Lewis had bought the massive estate right next to my modest 3-bedroom. The property sat on the other side of a low wooden fence that I had built myself the previous summer, sinking every post by hand, measuring every board twice. Within 48 hours, that fence became the border between 2 completely different worlds. I watched from behind my kitchen curtain as they unloaded their lives onto the driveway. Italian leather sectionals wrapped in industrial plastic, a 65-in flat screen carried sideways by 2 men in matching polo shirts who looked like they had been hired specifically to look impressed by everything they touched. Boxes stamped with designer logos piled up on the manicured lawn. A marble-topped dining table so heavy that it took 4 men and a furniture dolly to get it through the front door. Richard himself supervised the entire operation from the center of his driveway, barking orders into a gold-cased phone while his free hand jabbed at the landscapers who were already tearing out the old rose bushes. and replacing them with ornamental palms that had no business growing in Virginia. Richard Lewis, a logistics tycoon, Novo Re. He had made his money in freight transport, buying up small trucking companies during the recession and merging them into a single brand called Lewis Global Transport. The kind of man who confused owning expensive things with being an important person. The kind of man who measured every human being he met against the number in his bank account and found everyone insufficient. His son Marcus jumped out of a lifted black pickup truck and immediately started hauling gym equipment into the garage. Marcus was my sister Sarah's husband. She had married into the Lewis family 2 years earlier, trading our last name for Richard's money and a lifestyle she could never have built on her own. That marriage was the reason this particular tycoon had decided to buy the estate next to my fence. And that marriage was the reason the deepest betrayal of my life was about to move in right next door. Marcus was 24 years old, 230 pounds of steroid-inflated muscle, packed into a tank top that was 2 sizes too small. His traps were so swollen, they nearly touched his earlobes. And his face had that permanent bloated redness that comes from years of chemical shortcuts. He moved like a man who had never been told no, never been corrected, never been asked to consider the possibility that his body was not a legitimate argument in every conversation. Within the first hour, he chained a heavy punching bag to a steel post that sat directly against our shared property line, the bag hanging so close to the fence that every impact sent vibrations through the wood and into my kitchen wall. The rhythmic, obnoxious thuds rattled my window for the rest of the afternoon. I could feel each one in my collarbone. I sipped my coffee and watched him through the glass. I catalogued his stance. Open. His guard dropped below his chin after every third punch. His footwork was flat weight planted on his heels instead of the balls of his feet. Snorts. His centerline was completely exposed every time he threw a hook. He was a man who had trained to look dangerous in a mirror, not to survive against someone who had been trained to end threats in confined spaces with no light and no warning. Intelligence briefing filed and stored. Richard drove his G-Wagon slowly past my property twice that first week. Both times, he reduced his speed to a deliberate crawl at my driveway, letting the engine idle so the deep, aggressive rumble would announce his presence. His eyes swept across my 10-year-old SUV with the chipped paint on the bumper, my unpainted porch railing that I kept meaning to sand and stain my daughter's purple bicycle, leaning against the front steps with a playing card clipped to the spokes. He looked at my home the way a man looks at a stain on his new suit. Pure pity, pure contempt. He snorts wanted me to see him looking. He wanted me to feel the comparison. I noted it. I said nothing. I took another sip of coffee. My sister Sarah showed up on a Thursday afternoon. She lived right next door now in Richard's estate, sharing the master bedroom with Marcus. She did not call ahead. She did not knock. She walked through my front door, the way she had always walked through doors. Like the world was a series of rooms that existed primarily for her convenience, and pushed her oversized designer handbag onto my kitchen table, like she was planting a flag on conquered territory. She spent 20 minutes talking about the renovation Richard was funding for her new master bathroom. Italian marble countertops, heated floors with programmable zones, a freestanding soaking tub imported from a factory outside Milan that cost more than my SUV was worth on a good day. She described every detail with the careful precision of someone who had rehearsed the speech in the car, making sure every sentence landed like a small polished grenade. While she talked, her eyes kept drifting across my plain laminate countertops, my second-hand curtains that I had bought at the thrift store on Route 29 because they were the right length, and I did not care about the pattern. My refrigerator door covered in Lily's crayon drawings held up by mismatched magnets from gas stations in 3 different states. Sarah took it all in. She inventoried every surface. Then she picked up the coffee mug I had poured for her, without being asked, and sighed. "You know, Evelyn, you could have so much more if you just tried a little harder. That government salary is not doing you any favors." She tapped her manicured nails against the ceramic. New rings, 3 of them, all gifts from Richard's side of the family. A diamond cluster on her right hand that caught the kitchen light and threw tiny rainbows across my plain white ceiling. I bit the inside of my cheek. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out. My heart rate held steady at 62 beats per minute. I did not engage. I would not give her the satisfaction of watching me flinch. I turned away from her, walked to the sink, and started washing dishes. I let her shallow insults hang suspended in the quiet kitchen until she got bored and gathered her handbag and left, trailing the scent of a perfume that cost more than my weekly grocery bill. The dishes clinked under the running water. Lily's laughter floated in through the open window. I dried my hands on a towel and stood there listening to the heavy bag thewing on the other side of the fence. Every impact sent a tiny tremor through the wood. Marcus did not limit his territory to his own property. Within the first 2 weeks, I watched from my porch as he forced an elderly delivery driver to step off the sidewalk and into the wet grass, nearly dropping 2 packages just so Marcus could walk past without adjusting his path. He made the neighborhood kids ride their bikes into the street because he decided the sidewalk in front of the Lewis estate belonged to him. He left his sparring gear scattered across the curb, blocking the storm drain, daring anyone to move it. One afternoon, he kicked Mr. Henderson's garden hose off the sidewalk so hard that the nozzle cracked against the curb. Mr. Henderson, 70 years old, with a bad knee, just stood on his lawn and watched. Nobody on the block said a word. Marcus was a tumor spreading through the neighborhood cell by cell, and nobody had the nerve to cut him out. I stood at the window drying a glass with a dish towel, tracking his movements the way I used to track hostile patrols from a rooftop position outside Jalalabad. I noted the pattern, the time of day he emerged, the routes he walked, the people he targeted. I filed it away on a hot afternoon in July, the kind of day where the asphalt shimmers and the cicadas scream so loud you can feel it in your teeth. Lily was outside in the driveway washing my SUV. She had the hose in one hand and a yellow sponge in the other, and she had turned the radio on low through the open car window, some pop song. She was humming along, completely absorbed in the safe task of scrubbing a tire rim. The driveway smelled like soap and warm asphalt and cut grass. Marcus came lumbering across the property line, shirtless, sweating, his neck veins swollen from whatever he had been injecting that week. He walked straight up to my SUVs without a single word, without even glancing at the 11-year-old girl standing right there, and shoved his massive arm through the open driver's window. He grabbed the radio knob and twisted it so hard that the entire plastic assembly cracked off the dashboard. The snap was sharp and sudden, like a small bone breaking. He dropped the broken piece onto the wet asphalt and growled directly at my daughter. "Garbage music. Turn it down next time." Lily shrank backward against the car door. The sponge dropped out of her hand and slapped the wet concrete. Her eyes went wide. Her chin started trembling. She was too scared to scream, too frozen to run, too young to understand why a grown man would destroy something for no reason and then blame her for it. She just stood there, dripping wet soap suds sliding down her forearms, staring up at a man 3 times her size who had just shattered her safe afternoon because he could. I was inside the kitchen, 6 paces from the back door. I heard the snap. I saw her face through the window. My threat assessment system went from green to red in under a second. My jaw tightened, my pulse held at 60 beats per minute. I set down the glass I was drawing and walked slowly down the driveway. My hands stayed naturally loose at my sides. My weight shifted forward onto the balls of my feet. My shoulders dropped a 4 in. My spine straightened. My body moved into a combat-ready posture so subtle that it would look like a casual, unhurried stroll to anyone who had never been trained to recognize the difference between a person walking and a weapon moving toward its target. I stopped 4T from Marcus, close enough to act far enough to read his body. I locked my eyes directly onto the bridge of his nose, the spot where peripheral vision collapses, and a person feels the full unbroken weight of being watched by someone who is not afraid of them. "Marcus, you just crossed a line. Don't ever touch my property or threaten my daughter again." My voice came out completely flat. No emotion, no negotiation. It was the voice I used to deliver briefings in rooms where the wrong word got people killed. Marcus snorted through his nose. He puffed out his chest, pulling his shoulders back, using his sheer mass to tower over me by 8 in and 100 B. He smelled like sour sweat and cheap body spray and iron supplements. He looked down at me the way a man looks at something stuck to the bottom of his shoe. What are you going to do about it? Sue me. You're just some washed-up old woman living off a pathetic military paycheck. Watch yourself. He smirked and turned away, walking back toward his property, with the heavy swagger of a man who believed his size made him untouchable, who believed that the world would always step aside for 230 pounds of meat, because it always had. I did not chase him. I had purposely given him an exit to de-escalate. That was protocol. You always give them a door to walk through before you remove all the doors. I pulled Lily into my arms and held her until the trembling stopped. Her wet hair soaked through the front of my shirt. Her small hands gripped the back of my collar. Over her shoulder, I watched Marcus disappear behind the fence, still chuckling to himself, tossing the broken radio knob into the air and catching it like a trophy. I pressed my lips against the top of Lily's head. My hand rubbed slow circles on her back. My eyes stayed on the fence. Marcus had just placed himself on my active target list. August came in hot and loud. Richard threw a massive backyard party to celebrate Marcus winning a cheap plastic trophy at a local semi-contact tournament. The tournament had 8 fighters, half of them teenagers, and Marcus had won by forfeit in the semifinal when his opponent pulled a hamstring during warm-ups. But the trophy was gold-colored, and it had his name engraved on a little plaque, and that was enough for Richard to rent a speaker system, powerful enough to rattle every window on the block. The bass pounded through the walls of my house so hard that Lily's glass of water vibrated on the kitchen table. On my side of the fence, Lily had her middle school friends over for a study group. 4 girls with textbooks and colored pencils and highlighters spread across the picnic table in the backyard, working through a summer reading assignment. They were quiet, they were focused. They were doing exactly what 11-year-old girls are supposed to do on a summer afternoon, when the world is still a mostly safe place. Marcus spotted them through a gap in the fence. He found his perfect audience. He dragged his sparring gear to the property line and started throwing hyper-aggressive shadow strikes, grunting with every swing, making sure the girls could hear every exhale, every slap of his fist against his own palm. He threw spinning kicks that sliced through the air above the fence. And each kick snapped through the top branches of my prized lilac bushes, the ones I had planted the year Lily was born, the ones that bloomed purple every spring and filled the backyard with a sweetness that made Lily close her eyes and breathe deep. Each broken branch hit the grass with a sharp, wet crack. Between kicks, he threw long, slow looks at the girls. He whistled low. He flexed his arms and held the pose, watching to see if they were watching him. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A text from Lily. 3 words. Mom, he's scaring us. I stepped out the back door. I did not slam it. I walked straight to the fence with the same measured, unhurried pace that I used in hostile environments, when speed meant panic, and panic meant mistakes. I stopped at the property line. Take your circus somewhere else, Marcus. You're bothering the kids. My voice was a razor wrapped in cotton, quiet, but the edge was exposed. His ego detonated. Being corrected in front of 4 teenage girls was more than his fragile, steroid-soaked self-image could process. His face went from red to nearly purple. He stomped across the property line in 3 heavy steps, closing the distance so fast that I could smell the stale protein shake on his breath. His right hand shot forward and grabbed a fistful of my shirt collar, yanking me toward him hard enough to lift my heels off the ground. You dare give me orders. I could snap your neck right now, he roared. His breath was hot and sour against my face. Spittle hit my chin. Muscle memory overrode every ounce of restraint I had trained myself to maintain in civilian life. In snorts less than a second, I pivoted my hips counterclockwise to kill his forward momentum and collapse the angle of his arm. My left hand locked around his wrist, rotating it outward, hyperextending the tendons across the back of his hand. My right thumb drove directly into the median nerve cluster on the inside of his forearm, that specific bundle of fibers that sits just below the muscle belly and controls the grip reflex. Simultaneously, I snapped his elbow joint upward, past its natural extension point. The move was a textbook nerve disruption taught to advanced combatives instructors at Fort Liberty, designed to neutralize a larger attacker without leaving bruises, without breaking bones, and without creating evidence. Marcus dropped instantly into the grass like his legs had been unplugged from his spine. 3. His mouth ripped open, but the sound that came out was barely human. A strangled, airless gasp that ended in a high-pitched wheeze. His entire right arm spasmed from the nerve strike, his fingers twitching and curling involuntarily into a claw. I released the lock immediately. I jumped backward 2 full steps, planted my feet wide, and plastered a look of wide-eyed, clumsy shock across my face. "Oh my God, careful, Marcus. Did you trip on a tree root?" I yelled it loud enough for the girls at the picnic table, to hear loud enough for anyone at the party on the other side of the fence, because my body had blocked the angle from every sight line, because I had positioned myself between Marcus and the only witnesses. It looked to the girls like he had simply charged forward and face-planted spectacularly into the lawn all by himself. They stared for a moment confused. Then one of them giggled, and they all went back to their textbooks. Marcus crawled away on his hands and knees, his right arm curled against his ribs like a broken wing, his face so purple with humiliation that the color reached the tips of his ears. He dragged himself across the property line and vanished behind his father's ornamental palms. I watched him go. I crossed my arms. I turned around and walked back inside. 1 hour later, the hinges on my front door rattled under heavy fists. The pounding was so violent that the deadbolt shook in its housing, and the framed photo of Lily's kindergarten class jumped sideways on the hallway wall. I already knew who it was. I took a breath, set my jaw, and opened the door. Richard Lewis filled the entire frame. His face was the color of raw beef. His jaw was grinding sideways so hard I could hear his MERS scraping. Beside him stood Marcus, cradling his spasming arm like a wounded animal. His lower lip pushed out in a pout so enormous and so childish that it would have been funny if the situation were not so loaded with genuine threat. And right behind both of them, arms crossed, face completely detached, chin tilted slightly upward, with the practiced indifference of someone who had already decided which side she was on before she even married into this family, stood my sister, Sarah, Marcus's wife, Richard's daughter-in-law, the woman who used to be my blood before she decided that blood was worth less than a joint checking account. My own sister, standing with her husband and his father, not beside me, behind them. "You dare put your hands on my son, Evelyn," Richard screamed. A fine mist of saliva hit the doorframe and the brass knocker. His index finger jabbed at my face, the thick knuckle stopping less than 2 in from my left eye. "He told me you used some dirty trick to slam him into the ground." I held my position in the doorway. My posture stayed loose but rooted. My weight was centered, my hands visible, my breathing controlled. I gave him nothing to grab and nothing to misinterpret. "Check your own security cameras." Marcus attacked me first, and I simply stepped back. He tripped on his own. My voice did not waver. My face gave him nothing. Richard was not interested in facts. He was not interested in camera footage, or witness accounts, or the truth. He was interested in dominance. He stepped closer, pushing into the threshold of my home, and jabbed his thick, cigar-stained finger so close to my face that I could smell the tobacco embedded in his skin and the whiskey on his breath. "Listen to me, you pathetic soldier. I have money and I have power in this neighborhood. If you keep making trouble for my son and your sister, I will sue you into the ground. I will take this house and let Marcus smash your face in." The words came out like gravel thrown against a wall. Heavy, reckless. Every one of them a promise he believed his wallet could keep. I let them land. I let them settle into the quiet kitchen air behind me. Then I looked past Richard, past Marcus, past the wall of borrowed testosterone and designer rage, and I locked my eyes directly onto Sarah. I waited. I gave her every chance. I stood there in the doorway of the home where we had once sat together on the living room floor as children, cutting paper snowflakes with dull scissors, while our mother hummed church hymns in the kitchen. I remembered Sarah holding my hand on the first day of school, her small fingers squeezing mine at the bus stop. I remembered her sneaking into my bed during thunderstorms, whispering that she was not scared. She just wanted to make sure I was not scared. I stood there, and I waited for the blood connection between us to mean something. Anything. Sarah rolled her eyes. She let out a long theatrical sigh, as rehearsed and deliberate as every word she had spoken in my kitchen 2 weeks earlier. She looked at me the way you look at a dog, that will not stop barking at nothing. Stop causing drama, Evelyn. You're just jealous because my husband and I are richer than you, aren't you? Something deep inside my chest turned to ash. Not the hot ash of anger, not the sharp, bright flash of betrayal. The cold, powdery gray ash of something dying quietly, permanently, and without ceremony, the kind you find in a fireplace 3 days after the fire has gone out. Nothing left to save, nothing left to burn. My sister had just co-signed my destruction. She had handed me over to a man who had threatened to take my home and let his son break my bones, and she had done it for heated bathroom floors, and Italian marble, and a soaking tub from Milan. The tactical processor in my brain activated. It did what it was designed to do in hostile environments. It froze out every ounce of civilian grief, every childhood memory, every trace of hope. That family meant anything more than a word people used to justify betrayal and dress up convenience as love. I did not cry, I did not argue, I did not beg, I did not explain myself. I looked at the three of them standing on my porch, and I officially reclassified my own flesh and blood as hostile targets. I stepped back. I gripped the edge of the heavy wooden door. I closed it directly in their faces. The lock clicked into place with a sound like a rifle bolt sliding home. On the other side of the door, Richard was still screaming. His voice faded as I walked down the hall. I sat down at the kitchen table where Lily's math homework was still spread out under the lamp. I picked up the pencil and continued helping her with long division. My hand did not shake. It was Labor Day. The entire neighborhood had gathered for the annual outdoor barbecue at the end of the block. Mr. Henderson had set up his ancient charcoal grill, the one with the rusted legs that he swore made the burgers taste better. Mr. Clark had dragged out 3 folding tables from his garage and covered them with checkered tablecloths. The kids were running through a sprinkler that someone had connected to a garden hose, and Mrs. Patterson had strung paper lanterns between the oak trees along the sidewalk. I stood near the grill, holding a paper plate with a half-eaten burger, talking to Mr. Henderson about his rose garden, while Lily played tag with 3 other girls on the far end of the lawn. The relaxed atmosphere shattered the second. The Lewis men came marching down the street, flanked by 4 of Marcus' friends from the dojo. They walked shoulder to shoulder, taking up the entire width of the sidewalk, forcing Mrs. Patterson to step off the curb and onto the grass with her walker just to let them pass. The mile, Marcus wore a sleeveless compression shirt and had his fists already wrapped in white athletic tape. Richard walked behind him like a boxing promoter, walking his prizefighter to the ring, his chest puffed out his gold watch, catching the afternoon light. Marcus locked onto me from 30 yards away. His eyes narrowed, his jaw set. His snorts pushed through the gathered crowd, shoving a neighborhood kid out of his path so hard that the boy tumbled sideways and dropped his hot dog into the grass. The music cut off mid-song. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every head on the block turned toward the center of the lawn. Marcus stopped 5 feet in front of me. He reached behind his back and threw a pair of MMA gloves onto the ground at my feet. They landed at the toe of my boots with a heavy leather thud. Put the gloves on, almighty sister-in-law. You think your cheap trick that made me trip was impressive? I challenge you right here, right now, in front of everyone. His voice carried across the entire gathering. It bounced off the houses. It reached every porch. This was not a private confrontation. This was a public execution of my dignity, staged and rehearsed, designed for maximum humiliation in front of every person I had to live beside. Richard laughed from the back of the crowd, loud and deliberate, his arms folded across his chest. He was actively cheering for his son to beat a woman in front of children on a holiday. The entire street held its breath. 40 people, standing frozen with plates and cups in their hands. The sprinkler hissed behind us. The charcoal popped on the grill. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Lily stood at the edge of the lawn. Her face had gone white, Her fingers gripped the hem of her shirt so hard that her knuckles looked like small stones under her skin. Snorts. She was looking at me. Not at Marcus, not at Richard, at me. She was looking at me the way a child looks at the only person in the world who has ever made her feel safe, searching my face for the answer to a question she did not know how to ask. I realized in that moment with a clarity so sharp, it cut through every layer of camouflage I had built around myself for the past 4 months, that if I backed down, the psychological terrorism against my daughter would never stop. Marcus would own this street. He would own my porch, my driveway, my fence line. He would own the fear in Lily's eyes every time she heard a heavy footstep outside her bedroom window. He would own the flinch in her shoulders every time a large man raised his voice. I could not allow that. I slowly placed my paper plate onto the picnic table. I wiped my hands on a napkin and set it beside the plate. I looked at Lily and I gave her a single slow, reassuring nod. Then I reached for the zipper on my jacket, pulled it down, and let the jacket slide off my shoulders onto the bench behind me. I stepped out into the center of the lawn. I wore a plain gray t-shirt and tactical boots. Nothing else, no gear, no gloves, no tape on my hands, no theatrics. I stood with my feet shoulder-width apart, my arms relaxed at my sides, my chin level, my eyes locked forward. My voice dropped an octave, and 10 years of careful, deliberate camouflage fell away in a single sentence. One rule. I held Marcus's eyes without blinking. When you want to quit, stay flat on the ground. Marcus burst into arrogant laughter. He bounced on his toes, throwing flashy shadow punches at the air, rolling his neck, playing to the crowd the way he always played to crowds performing for an audience he assumed would be watching him win. He had no idea that he had just stepped into the kill zone of a machine that had been designed, trained, tested, and certified to end fights, not win them. If you have ever had to stand and completely alone while your own blood betrayed you for money, please like this video and share your experience in the comments. I drew my line in the grass right then, and it was time to collect the debt. Marcus did not wait for a countdown. He charged straight at me with a textbook 1-2 combination. A left jab to set the range followed immediately by a heavy overhand right designed to take my head clean off my shoulders. To a civilian standing in that crowd, the punches would have been terrifying. 230 pounds of chemically enhanced muscle moving at full speed. Fists wrapped tight, eyes locked with predatory focus. To a special operations combatant, his movements broadcast in slow motion. His jab telegraphed a full second before his fist moved. His right shoulder dipped, his left foot overcommitted, his guard dropped below his chin the instant he loaded the overhand. His entire OODA loop, the cycle of observe, orient, decide, an act that governs every combat exchange, was fatally choked by his own ego. He had already decided how this would end before it started. He assumed I would flinch. He assumed I would close my eyes and throw my hands up and shrink backward the way every woman in his life had done when he raised his voice or his fist. He had built his entire fighting identity on the assumption that intimidation was the same thing as skill. Greel. Instead of retreating, I stepped directly inside the arc of his heavy right hook. His fist tore through empty air 6 in behind my head. I felt the violent whoosh pass my ear, felt the displaced air ripple through my hair and across the back of my neck. Before he could retract his arm, before his brain could even register that his punch had missed, I pressed both palms flat against his tricep and his chest. I used his own massive forward momentum against him, redirecting 230 pounds of uncontrolled force along a new vector. Simple physics. An object in motion stays in motion. I did not need to overpower him. I just needed to change his direction. Marcus stumbled violently past me, his feet tangled beneath his own weight. He nearly smashed face first into the asphalt at the edge of the lawn, catching himself at the last second with both hands on the ground. The crowd stayed dead silent. Not a gasp, not a murmur. 40 people watching, and not one of them breathed. Marcus spun around. His face was dark red, his chest heaved. His pride was bleeding faster than any wound I could have inflicted with my fists. He came at me again. Faster, harder, more desperate. He threw a wild, spinning, roundhouse kick, the kind he had practiced against his heavy bag for months. The kind that had won him his cheap plastic trophy at a tournament where half the fighters were teenagers. It was a powerful strike. The leg whipped through the air with genuine force. It was also his fatal mistake. The second his back turned to me, he took his eyes off his target. 1 full second of blindness, an eternity in combat. I stepped deep into his blind spot, moving with him, staying inside the arc of his rotation. I hooked the heel of my combat boot, hard behind his left ankle, and drove a palm strike straight through his shoulder blade, directly between the scapula. The combination of his own rotational force, a locked ankle, and forward pressure through his center of mass did the rest. Marcus went airborne. His massive body rotated parallel to the ground for 1 frozen suspended second before slamming into the hard-packed earth with a sickening bone-rattling thud that I felt through the soles of my boots and up into my knees. The impact drove every molecule of air out of his lungs in a single explosive grunt. He landed flat on his back. His eyes went wide. His mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. His diaphragm was locked. His lungs were empty. His brain was trying to send signals to muscles that had temporarily forgotten how to function. Before he could suck a single breath into his paralyzed chest, I was on him. He thrashed. He grabbed at my arms with desperate, clumsy hands. I dropped my hips, sank my full weight onto his torso, and slid my forearm directly across the back of his neck, pressing his cervical spine toward the ground. I pinned him face down in the dirt, his body folded at a 90 degrees angle, his cheek grinding into the grass and packed earth. "Tap the ground, Marcus," I whispered it. My mouth was 3 in from his ear. The words came out with a freezing detachment that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with the cold mechanical certainty of a person who has done this 1,000 times in places far more dangerous than a suburban lawn. "Show your daddy what a loser looks like." 5 seconds of desperate, suffocating struggle. His legs kicked against the dirt. His free hand clawed at the grass, ripping up clumps of earth. His face turned from red to purple, to a shade I had only seen before on men at altitude who had run out of supplemental oxygen. Then his trembling hand rose 6 in off the ground and tapped the earth 3 times. I released the pressure. I stood up. I adjusted my shirt. I brushed a single blade of grass off my knee. The entire fight had lasted 90 seconds. The crowd stayed frozen. Mr. Henderson's burger had burned to a black disc on the grill, sending a thin column of acrid smoke straight into the sky. A child somewhere behind the sprinkler was crying, though I could not tell if it was from fear or because the water was cold. Marcus lay in the grass on his side, his chest heaving in ragged, wet gasps, his right arm curled against his body, staring at the sky with the hollow, emptied eyes of a man whose entire identity had just been surgically removed and fed through a paper shredder. His dojo friends stood at the edge of the lawn. Not one of them stepped forward. Richard broke the silence first, his face contorted into something between rage and absolute disbelief. He shoved through 2 neighbors and charged toward me, his thick arms swinging at his sides. "You son of a..." he shrieked, his voice cracking on the last word. I shifted my stance. I did not retreat. I planted my feet and dropped my center of gravity 2 in. I locked my eyes onto the center of his chest. "Take 1 more step, Richard, and I will treat you as a direct threat." My voice sliced through the air, and every person on that lawn heard it. Survival instinct overrode his rage. He froze mid-step, 1 foot still raised off the ground. His jaw worked sideways, grinding his teeth so hard I could hear the enamel clicking. He stood there, shaking with a fury so enormous that it had nowhere to go, trapped inside a body that his brain had just ordered to stop. He ripped his phone out of his pocket. His fingers shook as he stabbed at the screen. "I'll make you rot in prison, you psycho," he spat, jamming the phone against his ear. 2 police cruisers arrived within 7 minutes. Officers Miller and Davis stepped out, adjusting their duty belts, scanning the crowd. The red and blue lights pulsed across the faces of 40 silent witnesses, painting the oak trees and the paper lanterns in alternating flashes. Richard met them halfway down the lawn. He grabbed Officer Miller by the sleeve, pulling the officer toward him, his voice rising to a shrill theatrical wail that he had clearly been rehearsing during the 7 minutes it took the cruisers to arrive. "Officers, this woman is a discharged veteran with PTSD. She went insane and violently attacked my son without provocation. He pointed at me with a shaking hand, his finger trembling with a rage he was trying to disguise as fear. He was performing. He was playing the terrified civilian father, the innocent victim of a deranged soldier, and he was disturbingly good at it. Before I could open my mouth, before I could take a single step forward, Mr. Clark stepped out from the crowd. 72 years old, retired electrician. He had lived on this street longer than anyone, longer than the trees, longer than the fire hydrant on the corner. He walked up to Officer Miller, looked him dead in the eye, and spoke in a voice that was quiet and steady and absolutely certain. "That is a blatant lie." Marcus challenged and attacked her first. He pointed at Marcus, who was still sitting in the grass, holding his arm. He threw gloves at her feet and dared her to fight in front of the whole neighborhood. Every single person here saw it. Beside Mr. Clark, a 16-year-old boy named Tyler raised his phone. The screen was cracked across the bottom corner, but the video playing on it was crystal clear. Full color, full audio. It showed Marcus throwing the gloves at my feet. It captured his shouted challenge word for word. It showed him charging at me with his fists raised. The footage was steady, unedited, and absolute steel. Officer Miller took the phone. He watched the screen for 12 seconds. His jaw tightened. He handed the phone back to Tyler. He turned slowly to Richard, and the expression on his face shifted from neutral to something far less patient. "If anyone is getting cuffed today, it's your son for assault. You have two choices. Take your son home right now, or I arrest both of you for disturbing the peace and witness intimidation." Richard's mouth dropped open. His face cycled through 4 shades of red. He stood there for 3 full seconds, processing the reality that his money could not rewrite what 40 people had just witnessed. That his performance had played to the wrong audience, that the badge standing in front of him did not care how many trucks he owned. He grabbed Marcus by his good arm and yanked him to his feet, with a violence that made both officers tense and shift their weight forward. He dragged his son toward the street, but at the edge of the lawn he stopped. He turned back. He pointed at me, and his voice dropped to a low, trembling growl that was meant to sound threatening, but came out sounding like a man who had just realized he was standing on the edge of something he could not buy his way back from. "This isn't over, Evelyn. I will find out where you work and destroy your military career. I have money and power you can't even imagine." I crossed my arms. I watched him drag his broken son down the sidewalk like a piece of damaged luggage. I did not flinch. I did not respond. I simply stood on the lawn and welcomed his final mistake. Richard Lewis was a man of his word. Within 72 hours, he hired a private investigator, a former cop from Richmond, semi-retired, cheap enough to take rush jobs and lazy enough not to ask the kind of questions that might have saved his client a fortune. The PI ran my name through every civilian database he could access, every public record search, every social media scrape, every background check service available to licensed investigators in the Commonwealth of Virginia. He hit a wall so fast and so hard that it must have felt like sprinting full speed into a concrete barrier in the dark. My file at the Department of Defense listed me as a GS7 administrative support clerk assigned to a basement filing office. No photograph, no operational history, no unit designation, no deployment record. Everything above that clearance level was locked behind a classification wall that required signatures from a congressional oversight committee to access. The PI typed up a 2-page report billed Richard for 6 hours of work and told him what he wanted to hear, that I was exactly what I appeared to be, a low-level desk worker, a nobody. But Richard held a card he believed was bigger than any classified file. His logistics company, Lewis Global Transport, was aggressively bidding on a $40 million military transport contract. A federal procurement deal for armored vehicle shipping and supply chain logistics that would triple his annual revenue and anchor his company to a decade of guaranteed government payments. He believed that kind of money bought influence. He believed it bought leverage. He believed it bought people the same way it bought Italian marble and ornamental palm trees. Using his network of country club contacts, political fundraiser connections, and a state senator who owed him a favor, Richard secured a direct phone line to General William Brooks, the Director of Federal Procurement for the Department of Defense. Endrit, Richard called the general's office on a Tuesday morning. He introduced himself as a major defense contractor and a patriotic concerned citizen. He described me as a violent, unstable, psychologically damaged veteran who had brutally assaulted his son. Snorts. He demanded my immediate dishonorable discharge, and then he played what he thought was his ace card. He explicitly threatened to withdraw his entire $40 million logistics bid if the military did not fire me and throw me onto the street. Exactly 10 minutes later, my encrypted government phone rang. The sound was distinct, a specific secure ringtone that only activated when the call originated from a cleared line within the Pentagon's internal communications network. I was standing in my kitchen pouring a second cup of coffee from the glass pot on the counter. I sat down the pot, dried my hands on the dish towel, and answered, "Evelyn, I just had a Nevo man named Richard order me to fire you." General Brooks's voice filled the receiver deep and graveled, and carrying the unmistakable warmth of a man who had just heard the funniest joke of his career. Snorts. He let out a booming, raspy laugh that sounded like gravel rolling inside a steel drum. I leaned against the counter, feeling a smile pull at the corner of my mouth, and I waited for the rest. I let him exhaust all of his arrogance. The general continued. His tone shifted, the laughter draining away, replaced by the cold surgical precision of a 3-star officer delivering a verdict that could not be appealed. Then I informed him that you are the lead security assessor, holding the bid file for his company. His phone call threatening you constitutes a serious conflict of interest and personal vendetta violation. I closed my eyes. The $40 million bid was shredded, not suspended, not flagged for review, shredded permanently. Every background check, every compliance certification, every security clearance associated with Lewis Global Transport was now stamped with a federal conflict of interest violation that would follow Richard's company through every government procurement database for the next 2 decades. No branch of the United States military would accept a bid from his company. No federal agency would process an application bearing his name. With one phone call driven by pure uncut ego, Richard Lewis had permanently destroyed his own financial empire. I thanked the general. He told me to stay sharp. He hung up. I set the phone down on the counter, picked up my coffee mug, and took a slow, quiet sip. The kitchen was still. Lily's backpack sat by the door, packed and ready for school in the morning. The refrigerator hummed. The fallout hit the Lewis family with terrifying speed. The video of Marcus tapping out in 90 seconds spread across every local social media page and neighborhood group chat within 48 hours. Someone uploaded it to a regional sports forum with the caption, "Local MMA hero gets handled by a soccer mom in combat boots." It was not just a loss. It was a surgical public humiliation of a man who had built his entire identity around being the most dangerous person in every room he entered. The comments were merciless. The shares multiplied overnight. Master Silva, the head instructor at Marcus's dojo, watched the footage 3 times. He sat at his desk in his office and replayed the 90 seconds frame by frame, studying the footwork, the angle of the redirection, the precise mechanics of the final pin. Then he called an assembly. Every student in the gym lined up on the mat. Marcus stood in the center alone, in front of 30 people who had watched him strut around that gym for years. Master Silva stripped him of his black belt in front of his peers. He said 6 words. "You are banned from this dojo." Marcus drove home in silence. He walked through the front door, went upstairs, and locked himself in his bedroom. He did not come out for 3 days. Richard's logistics company entered a death spiral the same week. Losing the $40 million federal contract did not simply cost him projected revenue. It triggered a chain reaction that his accountants had never modeled, because they had never imagined a scenario where Richard's own mouth was the weapon that destroyed the company. His investors, 3 private equity partners, and a regional bank had been promised a guaranteed federal contract as the cornerstone of their growth projections. When the contract evaporated, the promises collapsed with it. They pulled their funding overnight. 2 of Richard's largest warehouse clients terminated their leases within the month. citing what their lawyers carefully phrased as reputational and compliance concerns. The bank that held his construction loan sent a formal review notice requesting full financial disclosure within 30 days. The fake veneer of the Lewis Empire, built on credit lines and inflated projections, and the arrogant assumption that money could outrun consequence, cracked from the foundation up. Sarah, my sister, who had married Marcus and chosen his family's money over her own blood, who had stood on my porch and called me jealous, while her father-in-law threatened to destroy my life, now found herself trapped inside a financial collapse she did not understand and could not escape. The heated bathroom floors were still warm, the Italian marble was still polished and gleaming under the vanity lights. But the money that paid for every square inch of it was evaporating faster than she could spend it, and the man who had promised her a life of luxury was now spending his nights on the phone with bankruptcy attorneys instead of restaurant hostesses. 2 months later, a massive moving truck idled in the Lewis driveway. The engine rumbled low and heavy, vibrating the air between our properties for the last time. The truck was white with no logo. They had not even hired a branded company. They packed their own boxes. I stood on my porch, holding a hot mug of black coffee, watching them load what was left. Richard carried a floor lamp with a crooked shade. Sarah carried a garment bag over one arm and a box of kitchen utensils under the other, her designer sunglasses pushed up on her head, even though the sky was overcast. She did not look at me. Marcus sat in the back seat of the truck cab with his hood pulled over his head, his face turned toward the dashboard, his shoulders hunched forward like a man trying to disappear inside his own body. They did not look at any of the neighbors. Mr. Henderson stood at his mailbox with a cup of coffee watching. Mr. Clark sat on his porch steps, his hands folded in his lap. Mrs. Patterson stood at the end of her driveway with her walker still and silent. Tyler, the 16-year-old with the cracked phone, sat on his front steps with his elbows on his knees. Nobody waved. Nobody spoke. The entire street stood in quiet, collective witness as the family that had terrorized their block finally packed up their arrogance and their broken furniture and drove away. Mr. Clark raised his coffee mug in my direction. Just a small lift of the wrist, a single nod. I did not gloat. I did not wave goodbye. I did not say a single word. The truck turned the corner. The heavy rumbling engine faded until the only sound left was the quiet rustle of leaves and a mocking bird calling from the oak tree in my front yard. I smiled. I turned around. I walked back inside and sat down at the kitchen table, where Lily was working through her math homework under the warm circle of the desk lamp. She chewed the eraser end of her pencil, frowning at a fraction problem, her bare feet swinging 2 in above the floor. I pulled the notebook toward me, picked up a pencil, and showed her how to find the common denominator. The pencil scratched softly against the paper. The kitchen was still. The fence outside stood exactly where I had built it, undamaged, unmoved, marking the quiet border of a life that belonged entirely to us. If you believe that true strength never needs to shout, and that karma always finds the arrogant, please like this video, subscribe, and tell me your thoughts below. Sometimes the quietest people in the room are the ones holding the keys to your destruction.